Good morning and welcome to our UBC Learning Circle Healing Through Land, Jazz, and History with Delbert Anderson. Today's conversation is presented in partnership with the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health. We'd like to thank the First Nations Health Authority for generously funding the UBC Learning Circle and allowing us to have these conversations. Before we formally begin, I'd like to acknowledge with respect and gratitude that I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. Please feel free to introduce yourselves and the nation you're calling in from in the chat box. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Serene Squawkin. I'm the Learning Circle Manager. I'm Silk Okanagan on my mother's side and Hickory Apache in Belgian on my father's side. I'll be the moderator for today's discussion, and working behind the scenes is Cynthia, our production coordinator, and Kira, our program assistant. They will be in the background interacting with everyone in the chat. And finally, before we get into today's discussion, I'll provide a gentle heads up that the topics covered may be sensitive or emotionally triggering. Please make sure that you're looking after yourself, and if at any point in time you need to talk to an elder, friend, counselor, or family member, don't hesitate to do so. We have some prompts in the chat if you need additional support. Now I'll turn it over to our guests to introduce themselves.
Hello, everybody. My name is Delbert Anderson. Delbert Anderson Yanishia bit atni nishna clash bashes chin kentha cheatney dasha che toward cheatney dasha nulle. I am coming from the traditional lands of the Diné in northwest New Mexico, currently known as Kirtland, New Mexico. And I'm very happy to be here. And I'm going to go ahead and get started. So today is it's going to be a very laid back sort of story, semi-lecture. I'm going to be sharing a lot of things that I experienced personally, healing through this great music that we call jazz and basically improvisation, land, and history. I find that these three things are what keeps me afloat as an artist, and also financially as well. And I believe there is a certain way every artist needs to conduct themselves, and also pay attention to the surroundings in order to have a career in the arts, but also having a really good look at themselves as a human being, and how they relate to others. So I'll hopefully I'll be able to cover sort of everything through this presentation. I wanted to first start out by saying I grew up in the Navajo reservation. I was only there for about 3 months, and my father ended up getting a job in Durango, Colorado, so we ended up moving off the reservation. Some of the things that I think about now was, when we're talking in terms of environment, I was able to leave sort of that crucial environment of the reservation where, I lived in Shiprock, New Mexico. I have cousins and, relatives that stayed behind and, moving off, and now looking at our lifestyles, they are fairly different. I, for one, was able to get into education early on. Some of my cousins never went to school. Some of them only went to school up to a certain grade level. And so there's a certain sort of, mentality that my parents quickly recognized, and was able to take action by sort of location of work, which kind of took them off the reservation, and they began to start their lives there. Something that happened, though, that was very interesting was during fourth grade, I went to an assembly, a music assembly, and there was this trombone player that had a jazz band behind him. And he began at the very end of the assembly, he turned his music stand around and he started to just play. And, being in fourth grade and seeing someone not look at music and play was very impressive. And so that's what quickly got my attention. And he started to just play a ton of notes, and I was wondering where all these notes were coming from. But at the end of the assembly, he told us that what he was doing was called improvisation. And he said that music didn't come from the sheet music, it came from inside us. And so that's what um, got me drawn to music. More specifically, the idea of improvisation was, installed in me very early. So that's all I wanted to do. I wasn't really worried at what instrument I was going to play. I just wanted to be able to play music with no sheet music. And so the first thing I did was the next day they had us pick our instruments, and I went and tried to play trombone just because I that's who I saw play the day before, and I couldn't make a note on it. So I ended up playing, or they asked me to go to the trumpet section, and I made like two little squeaks. They weren't even notes, and the people there, the educator said, "Oh, you're a trumpet player." So that's kind of how I began to play trumpet from a very early age, and continued with trumpet. And I was pretty horrible at it. Once we got into sixth grade, chair placement started to happen, and I was always last chair until one day my teacher, mid-school teacher, her name is Janet Isham. She took me in one morning and she told me to play a certain exercise. And I played it for her, and she said, "Wow, you played it perfectly." And she said, "Can you play that for the class?" So when everyone came into class, she said, "Delbert's going to demonstrate this exercise, and I want everyone to play it like him because he's playing it perfect." And I don't know if I was or not. I don't really remember, but it was sort of that feeling of having someone having your back. It felt like unconditional love, and it really pushed me, despite what level I was at. It really motivated me, and I got really inspired by someone sort of having like interest in your talent and interest in wanting for you to get better. Um, the years afterwards, from seventh grade all the way to graduation in high school, I ended up holding first chair all the way through, after that little encouragement. And so I was one of those who was able to get, by seventh grade, I was already playing with the jazz big band, community big band in Farmington, New Mexico. So there's a picture out there where I'm super short and everyone else is, 3 feet taller than I am. But I guess you could say I was able to hear, big band music at a pretty early age and kind of understood the style of it. And so when getting into college at Eastern New Mexico University, I was offered a full-time scholarship after I auditioned. And it was due to style and just sort of being comfortable within this swing music and also improvisation. And it was one of the greatest things that happened to me was going to college and beginning to study with professors that understood individualism. And I feel that that is what started my entire career off as an artist, as a composer, an educator, as a jazz musician. Basically, was all the teachers, although they would teach certain subjects and certain lessons and patterns and all this pedagogy, uh, they also had this idea of you need to do what you need to do. They never told me how to play, what to play, or anything like that. They just basically um, gave me freedom on what I wanted to basically do. And I feel that's what set me apart from many artists who begin their careers kind of going through it sort of this educational way. And I think a lot of us understand that after going to school and then trying to do it in real life and having a career, it's very difficult. And it seems like there's a lot of those steps that are missing. And so I had a really unique education in which, my trumpet professor, anytime he was doing a deal, he would turn it on speakerphone and let me listen in on how he negotiated. He was telling me to get out there and get my own gig, and really form a relationship. So it was sort of a offset education. I mean, I had the things that were going on in school, but also I was already technically kind of living it in a very at a very small level in the educational field. And I remember my last lesson with my professor. His name is Dr. Christopher Beatty. He now teaches at Texas A&M Commerce. The very last lesson, he said, "Do you know what sounds good? Do you know what sounds bad?" And I said, I kind of have an idea." And he was like, "Okay, well, that's good." And then he said, we done everything we could with the amount of time we had. You can say that you know how to improvise." And he said, "The next thing you need to learn is how to apply improvisation to your life." And that was the very last lesson. And I kind of thought it was just sort of a, oh, something fancy he could say, parting ways, that kind of thing. But I really started to take that into consideration. How does improvisation relate to our life? And how is improvisation a life skill? And it wasn't until I hit really hard times with my artist career starting out. I wasn't making anything. There was a lot of confusion. On the other hand, I have a very big family. I have a wife and 5 children. They're all about 3 years apart, and they're all different human beings. And $100 being away for 3 nights, coming back with $100 isn't going to cut it. And so obviously something was wrong there. And I had to really depend on, these improvisation skills that I've learned for, my instrument and myself, but really learning how to apply that to my life. So that is sort of my story, coming up. Where I came from. I'm sort of a guy that went through the educational music system, music education, and it still feels like I'm still trying to get away from everything that was sort of ingrained in me. And it's very hard to find your own voice when half of your lifetime you just been learning scales, studies, and that it seems like that's all you know. But so in 2013 is when I took the plunge. Before that, 2010, right after ENMU, I got a night job at the hospital, and um, it was brutal. I was working nights, and anyone who works nights, it's you don't technically get a day off. It's very awkward. And so I did that for about 3 years, but I ended up running into another trumpet player named Gavin Bondi. He's used to be the trumpet player with Pink Martini, and he came to our community one time, and I got to have sort of this side lesson with him about how do I make the transition. And some of the things he told me were to make sure that, well, when he said, well, it's probably best if you go into this career single, which, I was already married at the time. And he said, try not to have any kids because it gets hard when, there's other humans involved. And I thought, oh, wow, well, I have, 3, 4 kids already. And so everything he was saying, it felt like it was something impossible. But then he started to tell me to focus on other things like finances. He said, make sure that you're debt free when going into this. And quite honestly, at that time, I maybe had like 4 or 5 payments or bills that I needed to pay off due to schooling and everything. And he told me that it's just gonna, you're gonna be better off with not having to worry about payments and all these other things. But one of the lessons that he kind of gave me was he asked how my relationship skills were, social skills with other people. And I didn't really think anything about it at that time. But, I believe he was trying to tell me that a lot of it has to do with your communication with another individual, which I never understood. I've heard of people networking, and I always thought networking was just a fancy word people threw around. Like I didn't really believe in networking, actually. And, so 2013, um, it was his advice that said, once I'm making the same amount of money as I was at my night job at the hospital, and he recommended 8 to 12 months before making that transition. I got lucky for about 3, 4 months, and after my fourth month, I ended up quitting my hospital job. And the next, fifth and sixth month, I ended up not making anything with music. And so I was in big trouble. And, I was one of those that didn't want to ask for my job back because, I told my boss, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to follow my dreams. And, two months later coming back, it just wouldn't make sense. But it was a lesson. And that's when I began to really think on the things that, Gavin Bondi was sharing with me about relationship, about being smart with finances, time management, and all of these things. And so I basically went to go seek mentorship and was able to sort of get back on track, and making enough money to support my family and everything. At this time, my wife was also sort of working, so that kind of helped a little bit. But she only worked for about maybe 2 or 3 years, and now she's sort of like a PRN. She doesn't hardly work as much. Basically, I think she's like on call, but a lot of it depends on the financial work that I'm involved in. And so it's very, it's a very scary feeling. And I knew there was something I was missing. And so I started to really reach out into this music industry network and came across a sort of a booking conference that's called Western Arts Alliance. And Western Arts Alliance basically connects artists to the venue, to the bookers, to those who makes the decisions of who's playing. Um, and there are several of these. There's well over 20 of them that happen every year, year round. But there's two that I became heavily involved with, the Western Arts Alliance and APAP, which stands for the Association of Performing Arts Professionals. And those are yearly. One happens in New York, the other kind of happens in various places in the West Coast. And Western Arts Alliance had this program called Advancing Indigenous Performance. And in 2018, I was sort of a cohort. I wasn't necessarily the recipient yet, but in 2019, I ended up getting this award called the Native Launchpad Award, which was around $40,000 total, spread over a period of 3 years. And what that included was two free conferences of my choice with sort of a $17,000 payout for any type of development work that I needed. And I must say that if you do a little research and talk to anyone from this Western Arts Alliance program, they would all say that I was sort of the poster child of this program. And I feel that anyone can be that poster child if they're prepared. And this kind of goes back to the idea of improvisation, of being, because when you work in improvisation, you're basically trying to think of every scenario that you might find yourself in, and therefore you have an idea or a little experience of how that might feel. And in real time, if that happens, you're not so afraid of the difference or the changes that are coming up. And one thing was, when I knew I was about to get this award, I spoke with mentors. I spoke with sort of project managers and asking them what's the best course, what's the best way I can utilize this money. I was going to every free professional development class on artistry. And I really started to value information. I think the difference between me and many other artists was I began to really utilize all the information. Like I put it all into action, and really seeing it through. And I feel like that's one thing a lot of, us as artists, we tend to see things and, we have this idea like, oh, I've seen that before. It won't work for me. That's kind of, and that's just sort of being a little selfish, and um, I had a great teacher, and still, Bobby Shu. He's a trumpet player out in Albuquerque area, Corrales, New Mexico. And he told me one time that he told me to play a song slow as possible. And he said, I want you to play every note, but I want you to hold it, as long as you can. And I told him like I didn't really understand what was going on, and he told me, he goes, well, I'm the teacher, so just listen to me, just try it. And these thoughts quickly came into my mind, like, is this beneficial for me? Like I started to question it right from the very start. And then he finally told me, he said, you need to know what tired feels like, so you have a great idea of what it means to not have anything left. So I played until I literally couldn't, make a sound on my trumpet anymore. And I stopped and I told him, I was like, no more. I literally can't, like my lips are feels like they're gonna fall off. And and then he told me, he goes, that's great. That's what tired is. Now you know what tired feels like. And so it's just sort of in a similar way that, I think a lot of times we as artists start to question a lot of these avenues or pathways that people talk about and don't try it fully, or don't try to go through the entire process, or we'll go halfway and we'll quit because it might not feel right. But I can tell you that in improvisation, true improvisation, when you don't really know what's going to happen next, you have to be able to have that risk involved. There's always those risks involved, and being that just person who literally can stare anything directly in the eye and not be intimidated or scared of it. And so it's something that I feel is the barrier for a lot of us, artists, and you can relate this to many things, and I think we'll have an activity here pretty soon. But for those of you who are looking for sort of help and networking, especially networking, the Western Arts Alliance is a good place to start. Um, so I'm gonna go ahead and give you maybe about 15 to 30 seconds. This improvisation activity requires sort of a pen and a paper, or just something to write with. Doesn't have to be a clean sheet or anything like that. It's just a quick little exercise to demonstrate improvisation. So I'll go ahead and wait a little bit. Alrighty. Well, I have mine here, so you can always do this later and give it a try. So for 2 seconds, just 2 seconds, really quick, and I'll do this in front of you. I want you to just scribble as much as you can, right all over the page. Uh, Ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, stop. Okay. So that's my scribble there. Now I'm going to give everyone sort of 30 seconds to a minute, and I want you to make this scribble something recognizable. And it can be anything you want. And all you're going to do is, you can't erase anything, but using the scribble, try to build something off of it. Okay. And go ahead, 30 seconds. All righty. So, um, I'll go ahead and share mine again. So I made this like this stick figure and this guy with glasses with some hair and showing his teeth. Um, and the idea behind this is when we scribbled, it's it represents chaos. It represents something that we can't handle. Um, it also represents sort of something that's given to you that has no purpose at all. And the idea behind it is being able to make something out of nothing is very powerful, and a lot more powerful than you might think right now because it's very simple to draw on paper. Um, but how does that relate to, life? And how does that relate to sort of you being an artist in this world like right now? There's a lot of things that we don't have control of. We as Indigenous people know that there are a lot of colonial structures. You can kind of think of that as the scribble. However, the artists that seem to be a lot more successful are those who build upon that system that is already created. And I feel there are two artists that play an important part in this world are those that are trying to recreate the system, trying to indigenize the system, uh, and then there are those that are going to utilize it. And I always tell everyone I'm one of those artists that is in a situation where my family is directly affected by my career. So if I don't get a gig, if I don't make enough funding, that hurts my family a lot. Food, rent, bills, you name it. And so the idea of creating something out of this chaos or creating something within the system is something that I, as an artist, really started to latch on to. And because we can't control it. We're not in those seats that control it. And again, there are a lot of those who are very good at bringing down the systems, recreating them, but in my case, I just don't have that kind of time with my family being directly affected. And so I believe that's sort of the difference between some of us as artists. And it might be something that you want to kind of take closer look at, because those who are trying to rebuild or to break down the old systems, it's a lot harder to have a career in the arts when you're doing that kind of thing, because you're breaking down a system that was sort of there where you could somewhat quickly be at some success point at whatever level you might be at. And if you're breaking that system down, those success points won't exist for you. And so what I've been able to do is walk a very, very fine line of how I handle myself, my character, the decisions I make, um, and trying to build upon a system that already exists in order to sustain my arts career. I feel like that is something that I've been able to um, sort of capture, and I'm still learning, and I feel there are a lot more ways that I'm gonna figure out to make this work. But in a sort of looking at into sort of a band setting, I play in a quartet. There's a drummer, a bass player, and a pianist. And quite honestly, I'm not playing any of those instruments. Another person is playing those. So you can kind of look at it as, this band that I'm in, even though it's a band that we're all in together, I can't control them on what they play. If they decide to play in a different key, or if they decide to play slow or fast or in a different style, I'm going to have to cope with that. I'm not going to tell them, hey, don't play that way. And so I feel being in jazz and learning this idea of improvisation at a very early age had a huge effect on me. Had a very different, I grew up with a different perspective of learning that, anything that any process or any type of path that is created before you or something that you have no control of, I was very, it felt easy to navigate those situations. And I think now, just because of social media, so many other things, it's very hard to make those, the decisions, because we're all humans. We all feel emotions. I think, a lot of us sometimes we get intimidated, we get worried, we're shy. There's a lot of things, and for an indigenous person, as well, with all the sort of the historical trauma we've been through, it's even harder. And so I think something that I've been an advocate for was really trying to get this idea of improvisation and how it's a life skill into the hands of our youth, especially those who um, are growing up in a very underserved area, but also an area that, has high statistics in domestic violence, suicide, and substance abuse. And, I live really close to the Navajo Nation, the Ute Mountain Tribe, Zuni, and we're all dealing with the same things here. And so, some of my work involved healing and showing how this improvisation activity worked, of, making something out of nothing. And of course, that there's many times that we went into rehabilitation facilities and did this exercise, and really having um, having an individual find self-respect, and really learning what that is. There's a lot of different areas that people are literally stuck in and have no idea how to let go of that, because they never experienced anything else. So I feel improvisation is experience, and it's it's making something out of nothing. In this case, it's making something beautiful out of something that have might have broke us down, or a tragedy, or addiction, or whatever it might be. Turning that into something beautiful is what improvisation is all about, and what jazz is all about. So thank you for your participation. I'm going to go ahead and kind of breeze through here, these next slides. Um, so that whole idea of improvisation, um, I got with a foundation. This is a local foundation in my area, Farmington, New Mexico. They're called the Connie Gotch Arts Foundation. And I submitted for jazz jams. And before any of this started, what I had done was um, asking sort of the younger jazz musicians in the classroom, what is it that they wanted to learn. And I remember a woman playing saxophone. She raised her hand and she said, "I want to learn jazz like the old school way. How did they learn jazz?" And I was so excited, because I had just ran into an individual mentor. I like to call him my mentor, Brad Good from CU Boulder. He's the trumpet professor there. And he had this module on jazz jams as an educational model. And what I did was I took that and sort of turned it into a community model. And jazz jams began to flourish. It brought out a lot of instrumentalists. It started to really put discipline into a lot of the players. They wanted to sound better, so a lot of them started taking lessons on their own. It became sort of a musical hub. And I had these behind a sort of a pocket park behind a gallery called Studio 116. And we ended up fundraising something like $22,000, a little over 22,000, in about 3-4 months. And so we ended up renovating the back area. We built the stage, we bought systems, sound systems, chairs, tables, and we sort of made it our own little space. And then something very amazing happened. Um, some of the local businesses started to report that they were tripling in profits when they were open during jazz jams. While jazz jams were happening Wednesday nights 7 to 9, and those who would stay open were starting to see high profits when they just stayed open a little later during jazz jams. And so Wednesday nights, it almost became like a statistic where if they knew they were open Wednesday night and they were kind of close to the jazz jam location, they know they would get business. And so that sparked a lot of things. I know that the sort of article kind of went out, and I started getting all of these emails from, like the National Endowment of the Arts and like Doris Duke asking, what's the secret. And so it started a whole nother avenue for me as an artist, and keeping an idea of improvisation in mind, I went with it and just to see where it would lead. And so jazz jams is something that is sort of my way of giving back to the community and strengthening the community as well. There's a little picture of jazz jams. Our average numbers were around 75 to 80. I think at one point we had about 160 people, and the lowest around like 35 or something. And yeah, these things were very popular. So after jazz jams went for a while, I ran into many young artists, and they all wanted to form a band. They said they were inspired of seeing the core band that would lead the jazz jams. And so I ended up creating a program called Build a Band, where I took a lot of students, mainly high school students, and I put them in a crash course where they would learn business and also compose music, original music. And I actually ran into these two sort of organizations, funding organizations, First People's Fund and the Lewis Prize for Music. They really loved what I was doing. In fact, I ended up creating sort of a curriculum that was based off of my own family, and which sort of received national attention. And some schools and some organizations are actually implementing the curriculum in their own organization or infrastructure. Because the build a band, I look at band as being a family, and when you look at it in terms of being like a father or a mother, just a family in general, there are certain values that come out, and you start to understand each value and why it's important to the family. And so I went that route with Build a Band. And last year, 8 students joined the program, and 4 students moved on to college, and 4 of them ended up going to the same university that I went to for music education. And so that was sort of another surprise of, wow, these students are really taking the information in and running with it. Um, and here's just sort of a little bit about the curriculum, and I'll just kind of go over just sort of the 7 values that I practice within this Build a Band program. Unconditional love, basically going back to like my middle school teacher, like someone who always has your back no matter what. Respect, basically learning to respect yourself, learning how to listen. Service, I feel, is something that is very huge in anything that we do. I think we should always be doing it in some type of service format. Discipline, order, being organized, understanding where you stand in this whole process of life, of the employment world, the music industry, whatever you might be in. Sacrifice is something that is very hard to learn, and it's also, if you never sacrificed before for anything, it's a hard trait to understand. But I think in terms of sacrifice is knowing when you're ready to move on, and knowing when you have to learn a little more before moving forward. I know that sort of this mentality of keep moving, keep pushing forward is sort of a, it's a famous expression that just sort of keeps artists active. But sometimes, activity, too much activity can drain the body, and then you start losing creativity. So you have to learn how to um, really navigate your lifestyle, and making sure that it's really affecting your needs, that it's putting everything for the greater good of your art. And fun, which is, sometimes we as artists have a little too much fun sometimes. But it's if it's not fun anymore, there's something that's a little out of place. Something's not going right if it's not fun anymore. And luckily, I haven't had that instance to where I feel like, oh, something is off. But this is a article that was released by the Lewis Prize for Music. And I forget the article name, but it's actually under one of their resources at the Lewis Prize for Music. Um, and it was actually a case study of different programs and sort of my Indigenous perspective on curriculum. There's some photos. The top left there, that is the Build-A-Band recipients of last year, and the bottom right photo is them conducting a jazz jam. And so, they're doing great things, and I actually don't even have to be there. They're running it on their own, and so very proud of this Build-A-Band crew. Something that also been heavily involved in is Chamber Music America. And so as an artist, there are a lot of these organizations that have help, especially towards Indigenous artists or, BIPOC artists. There are a lot of opportunities available. And so I encourage you to look at some of these organizations that I'm putting up, and there's a ton more. But these are the ones that I feel like I have developed high relationships with, that continue to help me throughout my artist career. I received a grant called Presenters Consortium for Jazz, and going back to you know the idea of improvisation, I was able to sort of put a tour together that would teach improvisation and its values to our youth and to the different people within Indigenous communities. And it was so strong that I got feedback from some of the board, or the committee who was sort of in charge of choosing the recipients, and they thought it would be a good idea to put Indigenous artists, like a whole Indigenous sort of artist tour together. So with that being, sort of suggested, I ended up choosing three bands that were all Indigenous led, and toured with them at three different venues in sort of Native America, and very close to the reservation areas, and it was very successful. There's sort of all of us that were involved. Rico Jones, he's Indigenous, and he brought his quartet. Julia Keefe is also there. She brought a all woman, um, I believe, all woman quartet called Ayat. And there's myself and the trio as well. And so all of these were Indigenous led ensembles in which we all have our own sort of stories and ways of healing, and that's what we got to share at all the places we were performing. And another organization is called, sorry, I skipped the thing here. I'm going to kind of quickly go over the sort of land part of this presentation. I had talked a lot about improvisation and how it sort of was the field to all of these different areas and mediums of art. And now that, taking inspiration from improvisation, I wanted to look somewhere that was that I could, something different I could be inspired from, and kind of having a different perspective. And when I went to my elders in 2013, when I started the band, I asked if it was okay to fuse some of, the not Diné songs specifically with jazz, but sort of the sound of Diné spinning songs and fusing that with jazz. And I know it might sound kind of funny, the Diné man asking if it's if making sure that he doesn't appropriate his own culture. So it was a interesting conversation. But when going to the elders and asking this question, if I was able to utilize the sound of spinning songs and kind of pair it with jazz and funk, um, they completely were open about it. And they told me, if you asked us 10 years earlier or 15 years earlier, we probably would have said no. Because at the time, they said they were trying to protect their culture. They were trying to protect sacred things, information of getting out. And now, they said now there's hardly any youth that is interested in our stories, in our history. And so, with that being said, they said, you got to do what you got to do in your time frame. And they said, we did what we had to do in ours, and now it's your turn. And so the idea of it was, they talked about the spinning song, and they said spinning songs are social songs that all come with a life lesson. But also another elder was telling me that spinning songs was something that was based on an individual's environment, like his surroundings, his or her surroundings. And another elder told me that this idea of spinning songs, they said to think of a tornado, how a tornado captures everything around it and it scoops it up, it mixes it together, and then at the very end, it tosses it out. And so this elder was telling me that the people that I'm with, the location that I'm at, being in Kirtland, New Mexico, having sort of a Rastafarian drummer, um, a non-Indigenous keyboard player and bassist. We all have different belief systems, different backgrounds, and this idea of being caught up with all of them and being mixed and throwing us out. I like to tell people that, it's because of this spinning tornado. When you mix all of our beliefs, our music, our personal interests together, the music you hear is what comes of it, what is truly, social and from the Diné spinning song, in every form. And so that kind of gave me the idea of surroundings when the elders started to talk about, this idea of me leaving the reservation for somewhat of a better life path, and also being around certain teachers and who I was hanging out with, whose ideas I was sharing with, it all came into play. But they also said, you sound like yourself. You're an individual because you're out here in the desert. And they said, you're not influenced by anyone else but the land. And I thought it was a very unique perspective and idea. And so immediately I started to focus on just land in general, like landscape. I would just like something nearby is Shiprock Rock. And so I started studying Shiprock Rock, of why it looks the way it does. And so this spinning song knowledge is what sparked this whole inspiration or this project with land. And so on here, I just have, harsh climates create beautiful landscapes. Nothing just doesn't come out the way it was. That it took years, a lot of development in order for a rock to be smooth, for a canyon to get deeper, that kind of thing. And I kind of relate that to enduring trials creates beautiful, patient human beings. And that is sort of the basis of my entire, the land projects that I'm involved in. Oh, okay. And so South Arts is another organization. They had a grant called the Jazz Road Creative Residency, and I quickly and immediately reached back out to First Peoples Fund, and they were able to also support this project. I call it the Bureau of Land Management Tour. And basically, we toured 5 national monuments where we stayed at each monument about 3 days. The first day was all information, kind of like listening, where we connected with the indigenous tribe, the tribal leaders of those areas, and we learned their songs, we learned their creation song or creation stories, and it was sort of just a big, information sharing day. The second day was more of a workshop, and we got to sort of walk around in the lands that, um, you know, uh, very special places that the indigenous people would, wanted to take us to. And so it was sort of a hiking day, and we got to also share like a little workshop with the community. And then the third day, we basically performed. And during all this time, I was asking each elder, spiritual leader, whoever was representing the tribes and the locations. I asked them if it was what what's one message they wanted to get out, and kind of like my elders were saying, they said we want our youth to be more interested in our culture, because a lot of them were saying, knowledge is beginning to pass on with our elders, and they don't have anyone to share it with. A very interesting story. This was more with the Warm Springs Confederate tribes. Was there's a spiritual leader there from Tuesday to Sunday. He's at these longhouses from 10 a.m. to like 4 p.m. or 3 p.m. every day telling the story. And he said a lot of times there's no one there, but he still tells the story. So, right now he's probably there, telling his stories, whether there's someone there or not. And so there's a crucial need for knowledge, being passed to the next generation. And so with that sort of being voiced, I asked if it was okay to be inspired by some of the stories we were told and the music that was shared with us, if we could sort of fuse that with our sound, as our quartet sound. And immediately I sort of thought, maybe some of them might not be okay with it, but the reaction and the response of all 5 tribes, they were saying, well, could you actually play our song in this album? And I kind of thought, well, it has to be okay. I don't want to utilize anything that I'm not supposed to. And they said, well, if our youth hear it in the traditional way, they tend to leave it alone, or they tend to move on. And they said, but if they hear it in this different way, maybe they'll get interested. And I just had so much respect for, you know, the risk that they were like willing to take, and the sort of the trust they had within us being there, and just over 3 days, having that respect for someone else. It was just very it felt very good to me. And so what we decided was, at each location, we're going to create 2 songs. And one song is going to directly derive from the songs they taught us. And then the other song is going to be something more of us just inspired by, the lands that we were surrounded by. And so it became more of a preservation type album that I called like a land healing album. And those organizations you see on the screen, South Arts, Jazz Road, and First Peoples Fund, were all involved in, supporting that sort of project. But it was a great project because it was also another way of getting the BLM representatives and BLM organizations to work with the indigenous tribes. And it's something that is, it's not um, anything new, that there are definitely conflicts that happen there. But the idea of bringing art and focusing everything on stories and land was sort of that camouflage that I feel like the two identities needed to begin to work with one another on a very basic human level. And so that was sort of the idea behind these land healing albums as well, because there's a lot of different ways we can approach those problems, and sometimes it goes nowhere. But one thing that really opens up the idea and mindsets and relationship process is the arts. This is at Bears Ears National Monument. The woman standing to my right, she's actually the Lieutenant Governor of Utah. And the other woman who's at the left of me, in the white vest, she's actually the BLM director, Tracy Stone. And so it was just a very interesting day. I think that was the day they were named a national monument, Bears Ears was. So everyone was kind of around and we got to witness it, and it was very special. Here's at the Canyon of the Ancients in Colorado. This was definitely a performance day. And it just kind of gives you an idea of how many people there that come out to these things. And with that being said, being inspired by the land, one of the first tunes I wrote was for um, um, a place called Narbona Pass. It's a road that goes through these mountains, but you see this big boulder to the right, and this song was created for that boulder. So it's in New Mexico. It's basically in my backyard. But if you go to, I believe, Sheep Springs, New Mexico, there's a road that goes out west and it takes you up this mountain. And when you're going through the mountain, you drive by this huge rock, this boulder that's just sticking outside of the mountain, and just being that bold, very bold and strong, statement. This is sort of what I came up with, just the idea of the rock being bold and just fully um, out there, exposed. So this is our quartet here. We call ourselves the Delbert Anderson Quartet, and this was actually live footage from the Red Cat in Los Angeles. Awesome. So that was the composition Narbona. And sorry, I'm trying to. There we go. And so, with the idea of land, this the sort of next project was called Spirit Coalescent, and I received a grant from APAP Arts Forward. That's what the grant was called. And basically, we composed music, poetry, and choreography for 8 pieces of fusion paintings. This is sort of what they look like. To the left there, you can kind of see them hung above us. They're huge. They're like 4 feet by 8 feet, and each of them have a story, and they all come with sort of spoken word, choreography, music, and poetry. To the right is sort of our educational engagements with students, in which we played the song and we asked them to guess what painting it was the music was written for. And unbelievably, like a lot of the students got it right. So, those emotions and connections with the landscape are there. This is sort of the bottom picture there is all the paintings kind of set up. Our local mall, Animas Valley Mall, was able to give us sort of a space for free to promote it for the show. And it just kind of shows all around of what's possible with your art projects, and how to really take it to being something way more than just a performance or show. With that, connecting to land, one thing that I really wanted to do was connect to culture. So through the Mid-Atlantic Arts, we received the U.S. Artists International grant, and we're able to work on this South Africa project. Um, we went to WOMAD, that was located in Johannesburg. We spent about a week there doing different sort of engagements and connect. Really, it was about the 2 women you see on the right picture there. Alexandria Holiday, she's Diné. She's from this area as well, Farmington, New Mexico. And then next to her is Nalesiwe Mount Sweni, who I believe comes from the Zulu and a few other tribes. They are both sort of artists in that they both sing and they both carry indigenous stories with them. And so it was really interesting to see them connect. And one of the biggest things that happened at WOMAD was, in Johannesburg in South Africa, the respect for women isn't very high. Women are still sort of degraded, and they're not allowed to sort of speak their minds or being in any type of like leadership sort of roles unless it's decided upon. So there's still that barrier there in South Africa. But something that was interesting was we had a sold out show at the WOMAD, and it was still COVID, so 2,500 was the max capacity, and that was full. But when these 2 got on stage, we created a song called Grandma's Song. That was actually Alex's song, Alexandria's song that she wrote for her grandmother. And it was sort of sort of the like to honor our matriarchs. And the song talks about how, their grandmother is strong, the way she dresses is beautiful, the knowledge she has contains high wisdom and, ancestral knowledge. And so it was all about, the women. And it was very powerful to see these 2 perform that song on, like the main stage. And when they began to sort of do this collaboration together, they were both singing in their own languages. So, those who don't know Navajo wouldn't understand, and those who wouldn't know Zulu would not understand either. But when they started to sing together, there were a lot of the women that were in the audience began to cry. They began to shout out. Uh, it was just an amazing feeling because, that doesn't happen all the time. Some of the things that were very different in the area was a lot of times when we had talks about women and women in the arts, those engagements have to be underground, secretive. They weren't open to the public, although some of South Africa government did come in and listen, and that was really nice to see. However, they couldn't do it in a sort of public territory. So there's a lot of those things that were a little scary at times, but it was really like front lines doing the arts, like the heavy lifting of the arts work in communities, and really relying on that arts is a form of healing. And so it made me realize, like, wow, this is super important, not only in our area but overseas. There are those places that really need help. And last one we're going to talk about is research. And I think research has really um, um, put me together really well as sort of a self artist, self career made artist. And last year I went to IAIA and I was actually researching indigenous big bands, and came across a gentleman named JC Morgan. And JC Morgan is actually another Diné classical trumpet artist, who's from Crown Point, New Mexico, who lived from 1879 to 1950. And this guy, J.C. Morgan, Jacob C. Morgan, he was doing it. He was flying all over the place, Paris, London, Europe. He was a guest soloist with the government Indian band. He was very well trained. In fact, there are rumors that he was guest artist as well with John Philip Sousa's band, which the caliber in which John Philip Sousa was in was the elite, the high end, and for him to be able to go in and play with a group like that and with such discipline, this guy was fairly good. There's hardly any recordings on him. I'm still in search of those. Haven't found anything yet. But also, he ended up living in Farmington, New Mexico, and going back to the jazz jams where we were hosting it, or where the Build a Band students were conducting the jazz jams. He would also have weekend concerts there at that very same park with his concert band. And from what I understand, he was one of the only conductors that would allow, mixed race ensembles. So he wouldn't just keep it open to the Diné musicians or the Zuni or the Pueblo. He would also open it up to non-Indigenous musicians as well. And during the time, especially in Farmington, the racism was at very high. He was sort of controversial. He was in support of like the war. He wanted everyone to send their youth to the war, and said that they should experience. He was also a minister, so there was a lot of traditional Diné people that didn't really agree with his belief systems. And the U.S. government, although he was sort of a product of the U.S. government, growing up in the boarding schools and doing all the education, they were very jealous of him because he was a very wealthy guy. He was winning all the competitions at all the places he was teaching at. He was a carpenter. He was even the chair of the Navajo Nation Council. So this guy was literally, I think, he was way before his time. And one of his last letters that he wrote to a fellow minister of his is, he said he understands all the confusion from, not being liked by the general public or his own tribe or the US government. And he said, I'm only using the things that I have available to me at this very given time. And so it kind of makes me think of, the whole idea of improvisation, of him, how he latched on to the system and made it better for himself and his family. Really goes to show that these things work. And I had no one knows about him. I think there were many attempts from the U.S. government to sort of silence his history and destroy it and get rid of it. He did have a bunch of archives located in Kansas City that were put away, but someone ended up burning his archives unit down, and so there really no more um, especially things that pertain to his music career. There are a lot of things that still exist that pertain to his sort of political career with the Navajo Nation, but a lot of his music and where he had his biggest success doesn't really exist anymore. But I also have some really exciting news that I kind of wanted to share was I recently located his cornet that he used to play, and will be documenting that soon and meeting up with the family who's been helping me a lot with his sort of his history, his lineage, and some of the some are smaller stories that kind of get circulated. But I think it's important that we as artists tend to go back and really look at how it looked. Um, to the right, there's his gray, sort of his headstone. It's located behind the what is today the Navajo Preparatory School in Farmington. That's a young picture of him. He's probably around, I would say, 19 to 20 in that photo. Here's sort of just in general the research that I kind of gathered and collected, and this is actually was a display at the Tota Theater or Tota Theater here in Farmington. And again, I went to South Arts and the Jazz Road program, and I was able to get a grant um, to tour the research that I found on Jacob C. Morgan. Sorry, this thing's kind of stuck. Another thing that I worked on at IAIA was the long walk, and the long walk is basically, it says there 100 or 1,674 days. The long walk duration from the first surrender to the signing of the Navajo Treaty of Bosque Redondo. Basically, I had a melody and I put it over a span of 4.5 years, which is the time frame, um, basically from the first surrenders of the Diné people to the signing of the treaty. And last but not least, I was also a part of their Emerging Leaders of Color at the Western State Arts Federation, which sort of gave me the idea of being somewhat of a leader and advocate for Indigenous people. And I thought, what better way to be a leader than trying to start a big band with a whole other bunch of Indigenous artists. And in 2019, I met Julia Keefe, who is a Nez Perce singer, vocalist, jazz vocalist. She currently resides in Brooklyn area, and we've been basically business partners ever since we started talking up this Indigenous big band. And I thought it was very important that we bring back big band to to our modern society, our modern times, and because there's so much history within every individual. They all come from different backgrounds, from different tribes, and so they all have different knowledge, songs. It's just a great project, and I'm currently the co-director of the Indigenous Big Band, and Julia Keefe is sort of the head, and she also conducts and sings in the band. And there's a photo of our very first show, the premiere, which was at the Washington Center Performing Arts in Olympia. And there's sort of a video of rehearsal on the right there. And I wanted to kind of end this, this presentation with two messages that really stuck with me from my elders. One, always be in service to another. Basically, the way my grandfather told me was, he said, you want to pretend that everyone's your boss. So it's just another way of humbling, yourself, and always that you're always going to be there to help someone else. And I think it kind of takes away from that idea of selfishness of, me all the time, but start looking at how can I help others? How can I help the community? I feel like all the projects that I have in some way helps another person. And so therefore I feel like everything is successful because of it. This universal law of always giving, the universe will take care of you kind of thing. The second one was just mind blowing to me when I've heard of it. this our elder said, see everyone as if they are at their highest potential. And the example he gave me was, he said, look at a homeless person, and he said, you talk to them, you treat them as if this homeless person has a mansion or have several mansions. And it really stuck to me, because when you really practice that in this world, in this music industry, whatever you're doing in networking, you see past all the immediate flaws that someone might have, or you might think someone's mean, or or might have a certain problem. It makes you see the better and the good in everything, that in every person that you meet. And it's another way of being humble, but I also feel like it's also sort of a vision statement as well. Looking at the perspective of a vision. My son joined track. I'm not going to tell him, oh, you're slow, you can't you can't run yet, you're still small. No, I'm going to say, oh man, you're going to get first in the Olympics. Or you treat them a different way, and that makes you a very easy person to talk to, likable person. People tend to open up after that. And that's sort of what I mean by something. A lot of the problems first starts within us. If we don't have the right attitude, if we don't have the right perspective or have that vision, it's very hard to have a career in the arts. And it's a people thing, it's a people's business. Relationships really, really matter, and the way you conduct yourself really, really matters. So I wanted to leave with that. And thank you for all your time. And I went a bit over, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have, uh, or open it up for just in general discussion. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Delbert. We have a few questions here. I'm just gonna ask them. One question is, the person kind of opens up with, improvisation reminds me of adapting. I quit playing with a jazz group when the pandemic hit. I'm also aware of other areas in the lives of people I work with and in my life who also stepped and stopped out. Would love to hear your thoughts on how to reconnect in general to jazz.
Yeah, one of the things that I feel, um, we have to really be careful of what technology gives us to this day, because I know when the pandemic did happen, um, a lot of us started to use like iReel or play alongs, and all of these different technology things came out to where you didn't need anyone. But I can say this is jazz is something that's human. It's very personal. You need another person to do it. If you think you can groove to to a MIDI tech or a MIDI track, uh, what's the point of doing that? I kind of come from sort of that tradition of, you need other players, real life players, to really understand the idea of adaptation. Um, During the pandemic, we started to hear about this bubble system. You know how you would stay with individuals, like 5 days at a time, and you wouldn't go outside that bubble. You'd always stay with those people. Well, during that time, because nothing was going on, our band met every week, and we would meet Monday through Friday. And what we did was we played. We took it to our schedules, and made a commitment and said, hey, we're going to do this. Something that's very hard, though, especially out here where I'm from. It's hard to find those who play jazz, which is kind of a disadvantage that we might have, because it's not like Chicago or New York where you could just ask for some players and they'll show up at your door in an hour. It takes a little bit of planning, but um, I would say these technologies that we have, you can definitely utilize them, but don't make it about that. It's a way of just getting by and practicing. But I would first start off with someone who is just wanting to play versus wanting to quickly like create a band or something. And the reason why is I think sometimes as artists we get ahead of ourselves and we want like the whole enchilada. We want to just be a good band from the start in the get-go. But when I actually created the Delbert Anderson trio from the very get-go, we played with many other different bands. None of us really knew each other, but we would play with each other when we were asked to sit in with the same band or something. So that kind of went on for a while. But after a while, I got to kind of see like who was really in it to just play for fun. And so those are the guys that I kind of went and sought and it's been a lot better experience, and I feel that the individualism was really there from the start. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but I would definitely reach out to those individuals who are just wanting to play because of playing, because we as artists now, we're only doing our art because maybe someone ordered something, maybe we have a gig coming up, or we're practicing because we want to maintain and keep up. But no one plays or practices their art anymore just for the fun. And some of the exercises I'll do is I won't have any idea in mind. I'll just sit with my trumpet in front of the TV and turn it on mute and just begin to play just whatever. Well, I don't have any study in mind. I just play because it's fun. I think it's kind of funny, and I just try to go wherever I feel the instrument or my mind wants to go. And I think that's probably a better practice than trying to pair up with like playing standards with YouTube or Jamie Aebersold or these other things that a lot of us tend to do, and a lot of the educational system really pushes on. And therefore, if you have every educational institution doing the same thing, by the time everyone gets out, they're all the same. They're all, all of them can play um, My Funny Valentine, Blue Bossa, all of them can play it. And the crazy thing is they all sound the same. It's because, they're all using the same formulas. But I think a lot of the art where the real idea of real improvisation and adaptation begins is with yourself, of just playing because you're playing for no other reason but just to play. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Our next question is there an aspect of improvisation in the spinning songs that you talked about?
Well, I think the the um the idea of improvisation lies within who else is there. I wouldn't really say that I wouldn't think there's hardly any improvisation in the actual act of spinning songs, because most of the time the spinning songs were written with a very sort of formal lesson in mind. For example, if I'm going to write a spinning song and I want the youth to clean up after themselves, that's the idea that starts the whole process, is I want to make a song that gets that message across. And the idea of the spinning songs, I know in some of the songs they set up in a circle, and especially if it's something that people want to dance to, they're able to get up and sort of just ask a different person to dance and kind of continue in this circular motion. But it's basically entertaining, but it also comes with a life lesson. But I think the way that I'm sort of utilizing it is, once I get the idea of the spinning song and sort of get that sound and connecting it with the band, I always leave an area open for improvisation during the song. Like Narbona, you heard the pianist solo and then myself solo, but there was a song involved. It was very written close to like the jazz standards that that we kind of all know. Basically, you play a melody, you solo, and then you finish with the melody again. That's kind of the basic formula. However, with some of the songs, I didn't have any playing examples up here yet, but there's a song called Roadrunner where it's just one continuous melody, where there's no repeats, and so it's just like one melody goes through and it's done. Um, but definitely within, I think the people that are involved, kind of has that aspect of improvisation because you don't really know how the other person is going to react. You can kind of look at it in that way, whether it's in terms of dancing or if it's in terms of creating the song and you don't know how the people are going to react. So there's a little bit of improvisation, I feel, in everything. However, I believe for me it's very literal. I just leave space for it within the spinning song and trying to be inspired by the messages that the spinning song was trying to portray, or whatever it might be, like the idea of a boulder, and well, how does a boulder sound in Narbona? That's kind of what I'm thinking after, when playing these songs. So I hope that helps. But currently, to my knowledge, all the spinning songs are kind of created first before they're put out there. So.
Oh, we have a few more questions. We have a question. The question is, as Indigenous peoples, we find importance in recognizing our histories and connections to cultures with each other and with the lands. We're just wondering, knowing that jazz history lies with African Americans from the late 19th century and early 20th century, is there anything you specifically do to honor this?
Yeah, so I mean, it's one of those things you have to be very careful of, approaching the subject because there are different levels of appropriation, and we have to be careful of them. However, I by no means am trying to compare the two ideas, but I also reference things like the long walk of how new stories, new songs, new foods came out of that horrific experience for our Diné people. When you look at the African American side, just in general, like the slavery and turmoil that African Americans were, new songs were formed, collaborations were formed, expression, the idea of improvisation began to form out of that hardship. So when you kind of look at those two areas, it's basically when a human being is pushed to the lowest limits of their life, it seems like something's going to come out, no matter what. It's kind of the same concept of this spinning song. You rally up a bunch of things, something's bound to come out of it. And I don't know if it's just sort of a universal law, but I feel like the artists, especially the ones that I've ran into, the artists that went through the most hardship always tend to have, you know, um, like a very good idea of content and how to connect with that. In other words, they're very special. They're very talented. Those who experienced a lot of these emotions, and that's kind of what the improvisation aspect is it is an experience thing, but I feel that the histories, I try to relate it as myself being a jazz artist. I'm learning this aspect of improvisation, which pretty much came from the African American culture, of going through their hardship. The story that I'm trying to push out does connect to my past, to the long walk, to J.C. Morgan, to the idea of the elders when they told me that the heartbeat was the basis of our music. And so it's utilizing these cultural sort of ties, which a lot of people will tell you the way jazz came about. It wasn't only African Americans that were there, but there was also the Indians, the Mardi Gras Indians. There were the folk, Asian cultures, Western, and some of them even go very to the depth of or sort of West Africa, we're utilizing their rhythms, their beats. We're using the harmonies from, the Western harmonies, and and a lot of people refer to it as a big pot of gumbo of all these different cultures mixing. And I feel like it's it's something that it's hard to explain, but it's something that all came from a human being going through some type of hardship and suffrage that I feel like is where, not only where some of these creativity or the ideas come from, but it's also where the healing is. And I think if we kind of go back in that area, that's what I'm trying to capture with all of these projects that I have involved, is going back to the human being and really trying to look at um, what it is that we need to survive, not only spiritually, but physically, and, how it pertains to our career. I hope that answered your question. It's a tough one.
Definitely. No, I think it did. But that was our last question. Did you have any words that you want to close with before I do the closing?
Um, not really. But if you're interested, while it's here on the slide, delbertanderson.com, you can see all the projects that I'm currently involved with, and see the sort of the different musicians that I'm also collaborating with. I just recently launched a new jazz project, which sort of honors the legacy of two Indigenous jazz musicians that were sort of underlooked. Don Cherry, the pocket trumpet player, and Jim Pepper, the tenor saxophonist. At one point, those two were creating music, and at a very high level, and it's something that a lot of people say our generations, or their generation, was skipped. It seemed like it was skipped. So I'm going to try and bring more awareness to those two individuals, and sort of recreating music that's inspired by the things they were creating, during their time frame. But that's sort of the what's next on the on my agenda. It's called the Cherry Pepper Jazz Project. Again, Don Cherry and Jim Pepper.
Thank you so much, Delbert. And thank you to all our guests and to everyone for joining us today. And thank you, Delbert, for the amazing discussion. It was great to hear about what sort of projects you've been working on, and your kind of journey through connecting to jazz, and how improvisation has really made a impact in your life. Just before we end the webinar, we'd love to bring your attention to one of our upcoming UBC learning circles. We have a few. We have one on March 21st. It's Indigenous Peoples' Experiences and Realities Within the Canadian Healthcare System. And then we have Peace of Our Mind for Rural Maternity in BC with real-time virtual supports. That's on March 28th. And then we have Walking Like Warriors on April 2nd, Unseated and Undefeated on April 16th, and then Trauma Informed Healing Centered Community Wellness, that's on April 17th. All of our webinars are free to sign up for on our website at www.learningsircle.ubc.ca, and sign up for our newsletter. The link will be in the chat. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We look forward to seeing everyone at our next Learning Circle. Lim Lim, thank you.